Right. My name's Justin. I'm the CEO and founder of Gense Technologies. And we do two things. We do early screening and chronic disease management with a very simple medical device. So that's basically palm-sized. And that's it, really.
What was the initial spark or insight that made you decide that this was a particular area worth pursuing?
The problem in primary care is more of, well, the general healthcare is more of the personnel that they have. So in primary care, you have a lot of carers, but not a lot of nurses and doctors. And how do we sort of enable this sort of population to offer a lot more services is basically the main piece that we're doing. So what we have been doing is to work on a device that's basically really easy to operate, that can be used by general carers or even people at home by themselves. And that would help us and sort of reach the scalability that we need. And with this, we look at some of the most prevalent diseases in the world. So we look at lung, liver, kidney. So lung, we look at lung function. So one of the main lung function problems is called COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It's the top 3 killer in the world. So we screened that out early. And then for liver, we mainly look at fatty liver disease. So around 2 billion in the world have fatty liver disease. And if you don't manage this, it will go into fibrosis, cirrhosis, and cancer as a sort of a natural progression of those. So you really do want to manage it when it's reversible. And that's the fatty liver stage, because when you get to later stage, it's a lot less easy to manage backwards. And the third one we do is kidney. We do chronic kidney disease. And it's basically one of the silent diseases that you don't really notice until it's quite serious. Around 10% of the population in the world has chronic kidney disease. And out of those, if I make an example in the US, 90% of the people who has CKD does not know they have CKD. So a lot of times you do realize this when they start needing dialysis, when some cases needing kidney transplant. What we do is do this a lot earlier. It's really just a belt that we wear around the body. It takes like 2 minutes to do the scan. There's no radiation. It's non-invasive. And then we have to resatisfy the app basically in real time as well. It's normally out within a minute or two. So that's how we enable some really fast mass screenings, and it's really easy to operate and scalable as well. And that's the entire premise of what we're doing.
Could you talk a little bit more specifically about the device itself, the technology underlying it, and how it's actually being deployed in the real world?
Right, sure, of course. So the device itself has 3 components. First one, it's the main device, where we're operating a medical imaging technique called electrical impedance tomography. Basically, we look at electrical properties of your organs. So for example, if you have fatty liver, the electrical characteristics of the fatty liver is very different than a normal liver. And we use algorithms to detect the severity of it, essentially. So this hub connects to 2 things. It connects to the internet, cloud computing, back to an app, where operators can just operate a test and see the results almost in real time. Second part it connects to is the belt. So we do this by wearing this across the body parts that we want to scan. So it has just touch the skin. So normally people have to lift up the shirt for a minute before they put it down again. But if it's lungs, it's really just around this area. Liver a bit lower, around just above the bottom of the rib cage. Kidney further lower. And it takes a minute. There's no radiation. So it's really quite simple to use. So in terms of use cases, there are several. So primarily we're in primary care. So that means clinics where they want to do a very quick checkup, a lot more frequent checkup, so that you don't have to wait for a year. You can do it monthly, quarterly to monitor perhaps a fatty liver. So that's one side. And then the second side would be NGOs. So there are a lot of home care, daycare centers that would want to deliver more easier care for elderlies. So some of the, for example, in home care, elderlies are generally mobility having issues. So if we bring the device to them, it's really quite helpful as well. And we see quite a lot of interest in that area. And then the third area, it's corporate services. So we partner with clinics, we partner with sort of really large conglomerates and deliver sort of those wellness plans. And naturally, it's a very spot-on way to look at indicators that are specific to your organ. And there's not a lot of device. There's basically no other device that could do this that you can just bring out and do this in an office setting. And the reason why some of the sort of healthcare industry established players like to work with us is that we create a really good funnel for them to follow up on. So if we screen out fatty liver disease, it could be followed up by a nutritionist, it could be followed up by another test, it could be followed up by a medical professional to monitor your process. So that's essentially, it's a very good fit into that entire system. And those are the several things that we see the most movement in. But obviously there are other things like in nutritional sciences, in traditional Chinese medicine where preventive care is the main means and they try to modernize. Those are all opportunities that we have been approached directly by those practitioners as well. And in the longer term, there are sort of insurances about how do we encourage people to live healthier lives. Stuff like that are also quite helpful in the general ecosystem.
How would you characterize the accuracy, the sensitivity of your device, the credibility that it has with actual medical professionals, and maybe the aspect of what sort of regulatory approvals did you need to attain in order to achieve that?
Sure. So first thing I'm going to mention is we have done all of the clinical validation alongside the University of Hong Kong, and we have been clinically validating this at Primary Hospital. So we have doctors who are specializing in liver, kidney, and lung specifically to run the sort of clinical tests with us. And the reason why it's sort of accepted in the medical world is because we estimate the indicators that the doctors are currently using. So I'll give you an example. So for example, if a doctor is trying to find out if the patient has COPD, they normally would order something called a lung function test, where they have to breathe into a tube and then see how much air you can breathe out, for example, in the first second. What we do, we estimate that indicator. So that indicator, forced exhale volume in per second is called FEV1. We estimate that FEV1. And we have research papers that has been published in Nature Scientific Reports that basically validated that sensitivity and specificity of this estimation is over 90% for the lungs. And similarly for liver and kidney, we benchmark against current standards. Like with liver, we benchmark against ultrasound, we benchmark against MRI PDFF, and we have around 70-80% of sensitivity specificity as well. And for kidney, we do blood and urine test as a comparison with a similar sensitivity specificity. So that's sort of on the medical accuracy side. How do we gain trust, and why do we need to publish in that sense? So all the papers we publish have our partner professors' name on those as well. So they are co-authors of those papers. So that's one side. Second side is more on the safety. So what we have is IEC 60601. It's a medical electronic device safety. We are compliant with the safety test with what we call the EMC, the electromagnetic compatibility. So these are essentially also produced by what we call ISO 13485 factories, so medical grade factories. And they have decades of experience that they have produced FDA device as well. So this is how we sort of guarantee that safety as well. So these are compliant with sort of the CE standards of those. And accuracy, we deal with papers, publications. Safety, we work with certifications.
And do you need to gain sort of approval in the markets that you're in terms of being regulated as a medical device, or is it more kind of geared as a consumer device?
So with those certifications, we do have quite a lot of backing in terms of certifications to enter into those markets. So in Hong Kong, we basically have what we need to operate in clinics and sort of those screening places. In terms of the wider world, there are local registrations that we'll have to do. But essentially, what we have right now, it's more of a sort of a registration process that we have. So obviously, there are different places that require higher requirements, like with the US. We do need a separate FDA clearance that we'll be scheduling further down the line. But those are basically okay. First of all, as a screening device on consumer level, but in quite a lot of cases, as a sort of more medical device, it's doable as well.
How did you think about like this particular business model? How does that fit in terms of how you're growing the business? And then also, how does it fit in terms of where Gense falls in kind of the value chain of the healthcare system?
Right. So essentially run a B2B2C model where we go to NGOs, we go to clinics, we go to corporates, and then they could sometimes charge their patients, or the corporate would take up the cost. And we do this because as a sort of a medical healthcare device, you do want that trust upfront. So in many sense, this is very suitable for a B2C market, and we're gearing towards that. But as a start, if you want to build trust, going B2B first, partner with clinic first, will be a good way to go to establish a presence in the market. And that's sort of why we're doing this right now. In terms of how it's being followed up, it really varies. So in clinics, we've mentioned like it's a funnel that could create more touch points down the line, engage customers a bit better, so that people have more reason to go back to the clinics, every month or every 3 months to get themselves checked. For nutritionists, it's a very good validation to see how well patients are adhering to their sort of nutritional diets or sort of exercise plans, and by monitoring, for example, their fatty liver. But with NGOs, it's really a different touch point where they originally do not have a way to assess people at home. And what we do now is giving them that technology to have nothing into something. And this is why we see in those cases, it's really quite helpful to pick up a lot more problems earlier, help elderlies or people in rehab manage their health a lot better before you see serious problems. So it really depends on which sector we're looking into. But we're very much into the early space where we have scalability and it's quite flexible for people to use because it doesn't require a nursing license or doctor license in order to operate it. So it's quite versatile in that sense.
Where do you see the future for Gense going forward in the next sort of 2, 3, 5 years?
So I think the general space we operate in, it's really just primary care in terms of early detection and chronic disease management. We're not particularly just focusing on one technology. Anything that helps with value chain, we're happy to incorporate into as well. And regarding the regional expansion, what we do see is an overarching problem all across the world about the lack of medical capacity. But I think with a lot of startups, localization is really important. And I think medical-wise, it's even more important because the regulation is just very different. If we go into China, if we go into Australia or Southeast Asia, the role that the clinics are playing, the hospitals are playing, are vastly different. What we can say is that we do see a general gap where screening could help both the public sector and private sector a lot. Public sector, I think it's obvious. If you detect things early, you'd save a lot of costs down the line by treating people. Private sector, it could be sales funneling, it could be more patient engagement, it could be simply better services. So it depends on the market. But overall, we do see those being common themes across different markets. Exactly how we do it, it would depend on the regulation. But we do see this as a very, very common overarching problem across the world. And down the line, how we're going to develop, it will be several phases. The first one is right now we have a technology that could detect lung, liver, kidney. We will use this to sort of expand into the business model where we can cater to more customers with the current capacity we have. And then obviously we're also going into the B2C model where it really reaches the scalability. And that's further down the line, perhaps in 1 or 2 years, where it's not just clinics. You can actually do this at home and, sync with your doctors, your medical professionals in a much more easier way. And then obviously down the line, we would incorporate more capabilities inside, whether it's using our current capability with EIT to extend into more use cases like in the heart and sort of different organs like, or even extremities like sports injuries. It could be one thing to go. But at the same time, the overarching thing is really just early detection. So our technology stats complements well with what we do. We're definitely open to incorporate those into our system as well.
What's your view as to kind of the longer term future, say 10 years out? There's been a lot of talk of like medicine, moving from medicine 2.0 to medicine 3.0. What do you think medicine 3.0 will look like?
I think the main point is the touch points that you would create along the decade that's coming up. And the touch points, you do need different kinds of data. I think one that we're already doing quite well, and then most people are focusing in, is just digital data, like your app, your mobile Apple phone, your watches, what they can detect, and the general behavior of how you eat and stuff like that. But it's sort of limited to what we can collect right now. And one very important part, if you want to expand this into a lot more convenient, a lot more personalized, is that you do need really convenient hardware infrastructure to get those very specific healthcare touchpoints. And this is why we think the space that we're operating in is quite exciting, because we create those valuable data that will give you more than just your heart rate, your maybe BMI, some data that are not very specific. If you want this to be at home, you do need a hardware like this to create those sort of starting points of those value chains. And this is what I see a big expansion in the healthcare side if we want to achieve scalability.
What advice would you give to that person in terms of how they should consider spending their time or investing their time? Like what sort of skills and experiences would you recommend that they start to build out?
Sure. I think solving big problems does not necessarily have to be only solely focused on science. It's a lot of things. And I would say in the contrary that if you start with science, you might not always be solving the problem. So always focus on the problem first. And the way you could further understand what is a real problem is really by trying. So if I could talk to myself when I was in high school and uni, I would really encourage myself to start much earlier. Make mistakes earlier. There's no cost to this. You're not giving up a salary. You basically have a lot of free time that you can experiment around with. So test a few ideas, really go to ground, see whether people like it, build a product, and see if you can gain any traction. And make mistakes. It's fine. I have interns who ended up getting really good awards that have failed in one or two businesses. They've tried, they pivoted, and those are all within the uni years. So really utilize those. And if you come out with some sort of success, some sort of traction, even if you ended up having to start a new idea, it's still a really valuable experience that you can gain with basically no cost involved. So start early would be my main advice.
If people are excited about what Gense is doing and excited to learn more about the sector that you're in or your company itself, where can they find out more information?
So we have websites online, we have videos online. And obviously, you can always reach me directly via LinkedIn or email. My contact information is quite public, so I'm happy to chat.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you very much.